Oh, Mr. Burns, the real-life personification of unbridled power, corporate greed, and a man so old his social security number is probably 0002. He's the nuclear dictator of Springfield, the wealthiest and crankiest resident, and someone who somehow manages to be more ethically dubious than Krusty the Clown's tax returns. Given his extensive rap sheet, so long it could probably circle the Springfield tire fire twice, it's a miracle he hasn't been fitted for an orange jumpsuit. But in a town where Chief Wiggum is in charge of law enforcement and Judge Snyder seems to hand out sentences based on his lunch plans, is it any wonder Burns has never served hard time? So let's take a stroll down memory lane and revisit 4 times Mr. Burns should have been hauled off to the big house, but instead walked free. Mr. Burns truly shines. Or rather, he doesn't. Because in Who Shot Mr. Burns? He literally blocks out the sun. In one of his most audacious crimes, Burns unveils a giant sun-blocking contraption designed to keep Springfield in perpetual darkness. Why? To force the entire town to rely on his nuclear power plant for electricity, of course.
That's Boulderama! Take that, convenient smart! Take that, nuclear power plant! Oh, fiddlesticks.
Bathed in the glow of Burns brand electricity. Hello, lamppost. What you knowin'?
It's capitalism at its absolute pettiest, and Springfield's most illegal infrastructure project since the monorail. Think about it. Not only does this scheme make Springfield's citizens entirely dependent on Burns's overpriced power, but it also turns the town into a depressing wasteland where vitamin D becomes a black market commodity. Even Dracula would have looked at this plan and said, maybe tone it down, dude. And let's not forget the environmental consequences of cutting off sunlight entirely. Plants? Dead. Crops? Gone. Springfield? Basically an episode of The Walking Dead, but with more Duff beer. The crime here is almost too big to list. Environmental destruction? Absolutely. Economic exploitation? You bet. Public endangerment? Oh, just ask the residents tripping over each other in the dark. And yet, despite this being a clear violation of countless laws, not to mention basic human decency, Burns faces 0 legal repercussions. Instead, the townsfolk decide the best course of action is just to shoot him.
Hey man, are you okay?
Won't dignify that with response.
Mr. Burns has been shot.
Burns doesn't even try to hide his motives. He gleefully announces his plan like a cartoon villain, complete with a release the hounds flourish.
Take one last look at the sun, Springfield.
He's not just breaking the law, he's practically daring someone to arrest him. But this is Springfield, where law enforcement is handled by Chief Wiggum, whose greatest achievement is keeping his badge from falling into a donut box.
This isn't Mr. Burns at all. It's a mask. Wait, it is Burns.
If Springfield had any sense of justice or a halfway competent solar lobby, Burns would have been dragged off to prison for this stunt, his sunblocker dismantled, and his mansion converted into a public pool. Instead, he just keeps on scheming, proving once again that Springfield is a town where the sun doesn't shine, and neither does the legal system. In Who Shot Mr. Burns? Springfield Elementary finally catches a break when they strike oil under the playground. For once, it looks like the kids might get functioning chalkboards, or at least dodge another rat attack. But enter Mr. Burns, who sees the school's good fortune and thinks, mine.
In my 4th form chums think it would be quite corking if you'd sign over your oil well to the local energy concern.
Using some frankly cartoonish and likely illegal drilling techniques, Burns siphons the oil directly from the school's property, leaving them not only broke but in even worse shape than before.
In fact, to pay for the construction and operation and demolition of our new derrick, the school will have to eliminate all non-essential programs, music, and maintenance.
And it's not like the theft ends with a few lost dollars. It unleashes an economic and environmental apocalypse on Springfield.
I'm detecting over 20 different toxins in the air.
All right, everybody out. As long as Burns is pumping
The fallout? Moe's Tavern collapses into a sinkhole. Groundskeeper Willie loses his job, presumably to fund the repair of Moe's. And Springfield's residents descend into chaos, scrambling for greasy crumbs from Burns' new empire. Honestly, the only person who doesn't get hurt by this is Burns himself. Burns' crimes here go beyond your standard corporate shenanigans. Theft, environmental destruction, and reckless endangerment are just the tip of the oily iceberg. He's the only person who could make stealing from a school seem extra evil, and yet somehow no one presses charges. Did Springfield's legal system take a nap? Or is this just more proof that Chief Wiggum's badge is probably from a cereal box? Stealing from Springfield Elementary should have been Burns' one-way ticket to a life sentence. Instead, he struts away, leaving the school broke, Mo buried, and Willie unemployed. At this point, Burns isn't just escaping the law, he's moonwalking over it. If Springfield had a functioning EPA, or even just someone who cared slightly more about the environment than they care about winning at bingo, Mr. Burns would have been public enemy number one decades ago. His nuclear power plant treats safety regulations like suggestions written in crayon.
However, I will not overlook the 342 violations I have observed at your plant today. Either bring this place up to code or we'll shut it down.
Spewing radioactive waste as if it's part of the plant's business model. The whole operation is basically a glowing monument to environmental crime. The most glaring example? 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. In this episode, Bart and Lisa catch Blinky, the infamous 3-eyed fish, swimming suspiciously close to the plant. Blinky isn't just a freak accident, he's a literal swimming indictment of Burns' approach to nuclear safety, which appears to be, dump it in the nearest pond and hope nobody notices. When the mutant fish becomes a public symbol of Burns' pollution, does he clean up his act? Of course not. He doubles down, calling Blinky's extra eyeball a natural adaptation.
Be a good fellow and tell our viewers about your theory of natural selection.
Every so often, Mother Nature changes her animals, giving them bigger teeth, sharper claws, longer legs, or, in this case, a third eye.
Natural. If by natural, you mean caused by decades of unchecked radioactive sludge, and that's just scratching the surface, or the radioactive ooze, in this case. Burns' careless waste disposal is a recurring hazard in Springfield. Whether it's barrels of glowing sludge dumped in the woods or workers at the plant glowing like a crusty land neon sign, the guy has been violating environmental laws for years. Yet somehow, the worst he's gotten is a slap on the wrist, and probably a very well-paid slap at that. What's even scarier is how Burns manages to weasel out of every violation. One bribe here, one legal loophole there, and suddenly he's back to running the plant like it's a Fallout level. At this point, it's a miracle Springfield hasn't been declared an uninhabitable wasteland. If justice were served, Burns would be locked away in a cell lined with lead, spending the rest of his days thinking about the damage he's done to the planet. Instead, he's out there pretending Blinky is just a quirky feature of Springfield's ecosystem. Honestly, if Mr. Burns ever gets a biography, it should be called How I Turned a Whole Town into a Toxic Waste Dump and Got Away with It. Sometimes Mr. Burns doesn't need some grand evil scheme to remind us he's the worst sometimes. It's just a casual hit and run. In Bart Gets Hit by a Car, Burns turns Bart into a hood ornament and drives off like it's just another Tuesday. Seriously, the man treats mowing down a 10-year-old like it's an annoying pothole on his way to work.
Oh, for crying out loud! Just give him a nickel and let's get going.
In any sane town, this would end with Burns losing his license, his fortune, and maybe his freedom. But Springfield is not a sane town. When Homer tries to sue, thinking this might finally be Burns' comeuppance, the old man unleashes a squad of lawyers so ruthless they probably moonlight as Bond villains. They manipulate the case so thoroughly that Homer ends up apologizing for daring to care about his son's life. Oh, and just for fun, Burns bribes the jury too. Because why stop at simple corruption when you can go for the high score? Let's break it down. Hit and run? Check. Jury tampering? Double check. Manipulating evidence? Absolutely. And somehow this guy doesn't just avoid prison, he keeps his driver's license. How? The man's so old and blind he probably thinks the steering wheel is a phonograph. Yet Springfield's authorities let him stay on the road, proving once and for all they're as reliable as Homer's no-beer diet. Burns' attitude throughout is the best or worst part. He doesn't apologize, he doesn't care, he just makes it rain cash until the problem goes away. Bart's left with tire tracks, Homer's left with legal fees, and Burns is left laughing all the way back to his mansion. Honestly, it's not just a hit and run, it's a hit and walk away without consequences. If Springfield had even one functioning institution, Burns would be doing hard time and taking the bus. Instead, he's still out there cruising around like he owns the roads, which, knowing Burns, he probably does.